Hello, my fabulous Econ 345 students, and welcome to another fantastic class. Today we're going to be doing a review of public goods. Go all the way back to your Econ 112 mind space where you took Principles of Micro a while ago. And remember our discussion of externalities and pollution and different types of goods and how something can be excludable or it can be rival. And what does it mean if, like, I'm providing something but I technically can't stop anyone from using it, but my use of it doesn't really affect their use of it? What do we do? What do we call these? Public goods. We're going to talk about public goods today because this is going to give us some of the foundational knowledge that we're going to need to be successful in this course. Because government, this is the backbone of public goods, because it's when you need some sort of centralized interest to provide something because people don't necessarily want to provide it themselves. All right, so screen share, screen 2. By the way, if you notice that something weird's going on with the camera, I don't know why. Zoom keeps updating, and I can't necessarily just put my face in the corner like I used to put my face in the corner, and now I can overlay, but if I overlay, you can't see half of the slides, and it doesn't pick up very well in my office when it's daytime out. We're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine, but the camera is going to be wonky for a few classes. Sorry about that. So, public goods review. Let's go back into this deep knowledge that we have, then come up with some foundational information that you're going to need, because this is the language that we're going to use to discuss policy moving forward. So let's start off with a question. Why don't we pay for missile research? Like, you individually, why aren't you writing a check to some lab in North Dakota to study missiles? Well, answer 1 is because it's expensive. Answer 2 is like however you feel politically, that we're talking math in this class, not necessarily feelings on either side. But the reason you don't pay for missile research primarily is it's expensive and you can't afford it, right? You can't afford multiple $1 billion. You can't. Or at least I'm assuming you can't. If you're a billionaire sitting in my class, you had much better options. What are you doing? But no one wants to necessarily pay for missile research to be done. We kind of want other people to pay for it, right? Like national defense, none of us necessarily want to go out and write the check to pay for billions of dollars in national defense, but we kind of still want someone else to pay, at least in part, for it, right? So national defense is just kind of a good example starting out of what the free rider problem is. So we finance national defense through tax collections. Everybody kind of pays some taxes. If you legally work a job, you're paying taxes. Or if you get scholarships, I think there's technically a way that you have to pay taxes on those too. Well, what about the people that don't pay taxes? Let's say that my neighbor just like stopped paying taxes. They totally weren't cool with it anymore. What happens to them? Well, can we say if we go to war, like, hey, 99.9% of America is defended except for that one house that didn't pay taxes? Well, that doesn't happen. We can't exclude them from the protection of national defense. My use of national defense and being protected doesn't affect their ability to be protected, so it's not really a rival good. So sometimes we have public goods. Public goods are ones that we can't really exclude people from, and there's no real rival use, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those definitions moving forward. But there's some people who can not contribute to the cost and just say, hey, I'm not paying for that, and they still get it. This is called the free rider problem, because if everyone can do this, just say that everyone, like, say you weren't going to go to jail and you weren't going to have the IRS chasing after you, would you still pay your taxes? Probably not. You'd probably just not, right? So if lots of people do that, then there's a huge problem where we have lots of people who reap the benefits of a system but don't necessarily pay into a system, right? What do we do in those situations? Well, that's one of the foundations of public econ, is we're trying to figure out, okay, well, there's some things that we really need for the better good sometimes. How do we finance those? Or how do we make it so that people actually want to contribute? Or how do we maybe privatize some things so that maybe some things are provided through the people that really, really, really care and have the money to care, while the other people don't necessarily? This is kind of neat because there's lots of different information. I just realized at the top that I called this tax-funded public education when it should have been tax-funded public research. We're not paying for education on missiles. We're paying for research on missiles in this situation. Oh, I'm a mess sometimes. So what are public goods? You notice I have these little black bars at the bottom, and that's because I'm trying to get better about like putting the URL of the original issue with copywriting. So if you're interested in the copyright for any of these, they are public use, and you can find the link for them at the bottom. But we have lots of things that are technically public goods, right? Like lighthouses. If a lighthouse is on a rocky shore, it helps everyone. I can't stop it from helping. I can't say like I'm only helping the boats that pay for this. They're the only ones that can see the light. That doesn't happen. It doesn't work like that. Street lamps. If I'm putting street lamps out, I can't say, oh, you didn't pay your taxes. You can't look at the street lamps. That doesn't happen. National defense, clean air. There's lots of different public goods. But we kind of need to know what public goods are. So let's talk about what public goods are. Well, first we need some definitions. First is the idea of being non-rival. So goods can either be rival or non-rival. What determines this is if an individual's consumption of a good affects another one's opportunity to use the good. If I'm talking on this cell phone, you cannot talk on this cell phone. This is a rivalrous good, right? Because when I'm using it, you can't use it. The public school system, if I, go to a public school, it doesn't affect your ability to go to a public school. That is non-rivalrous. So things can be rival if one person's use of it affects someone else's ability to use it, or they can be non-rivalrous, where one person's use of it does not affect other people's ability to use it. The next idea is excludability. So what determines if you are excludable or non-excludable is if you can deny other people the ability to use it. Let's say that you're going into a movie theater. Oh, it's been a while. I haven't gone to the movie theater in a while. I just found out that there's a drive-in nearby, so I'm about to go to the drive-in movies. That'll be pretty good, because like Bill and Ted 3 is coming out, and like I remember that from my childhood. Anyways, Alicia, bring it down. Okay, so to be excludable, we either have excludable goods where, for example, a movie theater, I can stop the people who didn't pay for a ticket from coming into the movie theater, right? That's why they have the little gated area and there's a person that checks your ticket. We can technically stop people. That would be excludable. Non-excludable is like watching a fireworks display. Can I go to someone and say, you didn't pay for the fireworks, you can't look at them? No. I can't go to a boat and say, you didn't pay the ship tax, you can't be helped by the light from the lighthouse. No, I can't do that. So there's some goods that are excludable and there's some goods that are non-excludable. When we take the four together, we really get this graph right here. Let's put me down here. I don't even know if you're all going to see my head in the right spot. So we have two questions. There's going to be two questions whenever we start thinking about public goods. The first one's going to be, is this rival or not? Remember, rival is when me using it affects someone else's ability to use it. That's either yes or a no. Then our second question is this good excludable? Can I stop people who didn't pay for it from using it? Yes or no? All right, let's see what happens. If a good is rival and it's excludable, so my using it affects your ability to use it, and I can stop you from using it if you didn't pay for it. These are private goods. These are like, not exact statistic, but like 98% of the goods in the world, right? This cell phone, I have paid for it, right? Me using it affects your ability to use it. Can I exclude you from using it if you didn't pay for it? Oh yeah, if you didn't pay for my phone, you're not using my phone, right? Private good. All right, now let's say that we continue with rival. So my using it still affects your ability to use it, but we can't say it's necessarily excludable. Let's think about this as like a crowded sidewalk. You're going down into downtown Edwardsville and you're going past Source Juicery and you see that it's a Saturday when they have the farmer's market out. That sidewalk gets pretty crowded on a Saturday morning. So if you're on the sidewalk and it's already, shoulder to shoulder and you're just trying to get by, well, you using that sidewalk affects someone else's ability to get on the sidewalk and use it, right? So these are kind of impure public goods. We also call it like the tragedy of the commons, common goods. That's a different definition. You'll see me kind of flip-flopping in between the two. All right, then let's go to the other side. Let's say that we're no longer thinking about rival goods. Instead, my use of it doesn't affect your ability to use it. Okay, well then the next step is this something excludable? Can I exclude people from using it? Let's think about TV streaming services. Let's go for that Netflix, right? Me using Netflix does not affect the ability for you to have Netflix at your house, but can Netflix stop you from using it if you didn't pay for it? Yes. I mean, not really if you have a friend who gives you the password and stuff, but they're working on that. So yeah, they can technically exclude you if you didn't pay for it. It's also an impure common good, or impure public good. So these are the ones that have some qualities of public goods, but they're not necessarily the same. So we'd have a different form of policy intervention for them. What we're going to focus on right now, though, is the idea of pure public goods. These are the ones that they're not rival and they're not excludable. If there's a lighthouse, one ship using the lighthouse as a navigation doesn't affect another ship's ability to use the light as navigation. And I can't stop anyone who didn't pay for the lighthouse from looking at the lights, right? Fireworks. If there's a really cool fireworks display in Edwardsville, it's the Edwardsville 4th of July fireworks thing. Me watching it doesn't affect your ability to watch it. And I can't stop someone who didn't pay for fireworks from watching it, right? These are pure public goods. National defense is kind of the one that they typically talk about, but it can also be different types of like education in some senses, lighthouses, clean air, the EPA, a bunch of other stuff. These are our pure public goods, and these are the ones that we're really going to start focusing on, because a lot of the time these are the ones that government provide because it's just not financially viable for anyone else to provide them, but they still provide some sort of necessity for society. So pure public goods are goods that are perfectly non-rival in consumption, and they're non-excludable. Impure public goods are the ones that have one or the other, right? So they're either non-rival or they are non-excludable, but they're not fully a public good. There's still some other things that we're going to have to think about when we're addressing these items, okay? Private goods, they're their own thing. Unless it's regulation a lot of the time, private goods just kind of operate on their own. Phones are a bad example. Nail polish. A private company ends up producing this nail polish. I, as a private citizen, end up buying this nail polish. We have some sort of exchange of goods. Now, there's some sort of regulation on this, on like how much that they can sell over what size and like what chemicals are in it. But besides that, a lot of the time, these are just taken care of by the market, operating on its own with its demand and supply. But sometimes demand and supply can't always navigate every single piece of an issue, and that's why we have to think about public goods in a slightly different way. So the private sector might underprovide public goods, right? If I told you that Edwardsville has no fire trucks, right? No fire trucks whatsoever, unless you pay for them. And everybody has to pay for their own fire truck. Are you going to pay for a fire truck? Probably not. They're like $4 million. They're really expensive, right? So the private sector, if it's just the private people, they might produce less of something. There might be an under provision just because, you know, it's expensive and individuals don't necessarily want to afford this entire cost, especially if it's for a good that protects everyone. So why would I buy a $4 million fire truck that's going to protect everyone in town and like no one else contribute to the fire truck? That might not be in my MO, right? So the market does not produce the efficient amount of a public good because of the free rider problem. If I know that anyone else in Edwardsville who buys a fire truck, that fire truck has to help me if my house catches on fire, then I'm not going to buy a fire truck. I'm just going to wait for someone else to buy one. The free rider problem is when an investment has a personal cost, but the benefit goes to everyone. If the benefit goes to everyone, then individuals often will underinvest because they're like, I'm going to get the benefit anyways, and I don't really have to pay for it, right? So let's say that we have Ben and Jerry, right? If Ben consumes missiles, and these missiles also benefit Jerry, then Jerry may not want to pay for missiles or pay his taxes for the money that goes to missiles because Ben's already doing it. Yeah? The result ends up being that private markets might have an inefficiently low quantity of some goods in that sense. Let's give a couple more examples of the free rider problem because it's kind of an important one to understand, right? Museums. Many museums don't actually charge a fee. So all the ones in DC don't charge a fee, well, except for like the Spy Museum, but all the government-owned ones don't charge a fee. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has a recommended donation jar that sits there. Actually, what is it called? There's like the Lewis and Clark Museum that's nearby town. Cat, yes, fine, I'll pay attention to you. Come here. This is Stormy. I love her more than life. She's a really cute cat. Okay, so here, do you want to sit up there? Ah, okay, fine. They have a recommended donation. You don't technically have to pay to go into these museums. So who ends up paying? Well, if you know you can walk in for free or you can donate money, a lot of people just walk in for free. Only about 17% of people will actually end up donating. So what do they do in those situations? Well, for example, the Metropolitan Museum, they know that they are taxpayer funded, so anyone who's from out of town, so they don't necessarily pay taxes to uphold the museum, they have to pay a charge. But all the people in town whose taxes pay for it, they don't have to pay a charge. That's one way of kind of dealing with the free rider problem. Let's go to a different example. Online information sharing, right? There's 500 million people who use Wikipedia. That's a lot, right? And almost all the content is actually written by volunteers. Like, for example, I've written on plenty of Wikipedias for like famous economists. I'll be like, yes, they actually did this in 1972 with the really cool thing where they went crazy and ran off into the forest to hang out with the flowers and trees. Kat, you're really making it difficult to teach today. You know, this is what happens when you teach at home. So this content in Wikipedia is exclusively written by volunteers. This means that because technically they work off donations. When was the last time you donated to Wikipedia? It's probably been a while. I know I gave them $3 once and they have not stopped sending me emails since. Like, I want to help them out and I want to contribute to the greater good. But wow, they send a lot of emails. So less than 0.5% of readers actually end up contributing regularly, and about in content form, and about 1.5% of non-editing readers, or 1.5% of non-editing readers actually donate to their funding campaigns. So there's about 490 million with an M readers who just free ride, and they're like, yeah, Wikipedia is cool, I'm taking the information from this, but I'm not providing new information, I'm not paying for it. Free rider problem. So can private providers overcome the free rider problem? So a lot of the discussion for why we have government intervention is the fact that the free rider problem is so prevalent. But that doesn't mean that private citizens can't overcome it. They just have to recognize that this is a problem and develop some sort of method for overcoming it, right? So the free rider problem does not lead to a complete absence of private provision. There's still private windmills, and there's still private lighthouses, and there's still private street lamps. But they may not be to the level that is needed by society, right? When private suppliers are given the ability to overcome the problem of non-excludability, they can produce efficient quantities of the good. So essentially, what we need to do, if we're going to make it so that private providers can actually overcome this problem, we need to make some sort of way that we turn this pure public good into an impure public good, either by restricting the excludability or the rivalness. The rivalness is hard, but the excludability, not as much. What if instead I made something private, right? Maybe there was a giant pasture of cows, and anybody could take their cows to this land, and they could feed off the land, right? Well, if I wanted, and then no one actually pays for the land and the upkeep and stuff, so it all just goes terribly, terribly wrong. But one thing that they can do is they can privatize it and say, oh, no, this field actually belongs to someone, you have to pay an entrance fee now. Well, now you've made it so it can exclude people. If it can exclude people, then there's different policy interventions we can do so that private providers, private people who really want to take care of this land can do that, right? Let's look at an example. Business improvement districts. So many, many years ago, I guess not really many, this is the 1980s, but that was before my time because I'm a 90s baby, so lots of people got together in New York and they decided that clean, safe sidewalks are a public good. No one really wanted to pay for the sidewalks to be clean. No one really wanted to pay for them to be safe, but everybody wanted them to be clean and safe. And if they're clean and safe for one person, they're kind of clean and safe for everyone. So no one's really incentivized to pay for it themselves. So cities attempted to provide street repair, police work, and they financed this all with tax revenue. But, you know, a lot of people didn't pay taxes. A lot of it was visitors that were causing a problem. It turned out that, like, even though the government was providing it, the cities were still dirty and dangerous and decrepit and increasingly derelict. That's not my quote. That's actually one from some news source. Anyways, so in 1992, a group of private firms got together because they said, this is a problem. Like, we're all paying taxes so that the government will give us these clean and pretty streets, but these streets are crap. They're terrible. So we're a bunch of private firms. We all live and work on this strip, and we really want people to come to our businesses in Times Square. We would love that. So let's all work together. And we're going to create a business improvement district. We're all going to come together and we're going to sign a form, and we're going to promise that we're going to work together, and we're going to invest money, and we're going to make it safe, right? So the business improvement district was just a legal entity of all these different shop owners and firm owners coming together that said that they were going to provide local services. They were going to keep things clean. They were going to have their own janitors. They were going to have their own street sweepers. They were going to have security. They were going to have all these other things. And they were going to fund these by each kind of paying fees, and by having fees come in from local businesses, right? Do they end up overcoming the free rider problem? Well, if you've ever seen videos of Times Square and, you know, the big giant ball drop there, I mean, they do manage to stay relatively clean, and they're relatively safe, which is why people go to Times Square now. So the New York City law allows for the business, or the bid, which is what we're going to call it, to levy fees on local businesses as long as at least 60% of the businesses agree to join. So if at least 60% of the businesses say, yeah, we really, really, really want this, we want to work together, then the law allows them to charge a fee. And 84% of the businesses agreed to pay the fee in Times Square, and that's why we had the resounding success of Times Square. Crime dropped significantly. There's so much less crime than there was in the 80s. It's attractive and pretty and has all the pretty lights, and it's safe, and that's why people go there for New Year's, and there's always big parties, and there's really interesting things, and there's business and tourism. So these businesses did get together, and they did want to provide this good, right? Because there was a public good that was not adequately being provided. But the way that they were able to provide the public good of clean streets and a safe location was by turning this public good into something that more resembled an impure public good. They found an excludability, right? So it took government intervention. The government technically had to make the rules so that they could levy these charges, but they made it so that they could kind of start excluding people from living and operating and working on these streets that were unwilling to pay the fee to keep the streets better. So yes, private citizens did totally manage to make this much better situation and resolved a huge issue that was happening with public goods, but they did so through government intervention. So it's just kind of interesting how that works. These are the sort of examples that we have to explore in this class to understand what these potential changes actually mean when we look at the big picture. Because there's a bottom line. And what is the bottom line? The bottom line is that markets can mostly overcome the free rider problem. When some individuals care more than others, like let's say that I really, really care about, I don't know, some tree. I really care about that tree. Well, I might care about that tree more than other people. So I might be willing to pay for the tree, and I might be willing to take care of the tree, and I might be willing to buy a gardener for the tree. And with that, I can kind of overcome the free rider problem of everybody else wants to enjoy this pretty tree but not pay for it, right? Markets can mostly overcome that. But there are some private goods that are provided because some people are altruistic. Why did Times Square in New York become this pretty hub that people like to go to? Because some people that lived there really wanted to do better and wanted to provide better, so they got together to do so, right? So some private goods are sometimes provided because people are altruistic, not because it's necessarily for the common good, right? So what does altruism even mean? So for something to be altruistic, this is one of two different definitions I need. To be altruistic means an individual values the benefit and cost to others in their consumption choices. If I took care of a tree because I thought it would make all the students really happy, you would be so happy because you'd see this tree, and then the squirrels would be happy, and the deer would be happy, and everyone would be so happy, and it's great. Then that means my choice to take care of this tree was not only based on my feelings about the tree, like I get some benefit, right? And it gives me some cost. But I also include the utility or the happiness that I get from everyone else being benefited. If I see 12 happy students underneath this tree, then I'll be like, yeah, that's great. And their happiness kind of compounds into my happiness, which makes my benefit go above what the cost is to maintain this tree. Many laboratory experiments provide evidence for altruism and show that people contribute to public goods. They just do. Sometimes they actually do. It's real weird. They don't necessarily do it forever, but we don't have a lab here, but at my old school, what we used to do is we'd pay undergrads to come in, and we would just like make them play games, and we'd see if they'd help other people out, not because it helped them out, but because it'd make other people happy. Turns out sometimes they do, and that's kind of cool. All right, so we have this altruism component of sometimes people do things not only because it benefits them, but because the benefit to others makes them happy, and that benefits them even more. But then there's also the idea of social capital. So social capital is the value of altruistic and communal behavior in society. When we all come together to make cleaner and safer streets, there's some social capital to that. When we all come together to like wear masks to prevent the spread of coronavirus through the school, that's altruistic communal behavior, because like for us personally, I mean, I'm healthy. I'm very unlikely to get sick. I'm even more unlikely to die if I get sick. But why do I wear masks? So I don't get my students sick. I don't want to do that. Why do other people do it? Because they don't want to get their friends and family and loved ones sick. So this sort of communal altruistic behavior builds social capital. And social capital is kind of this happiness or the well-being of society that happens because people can kind of come together to make a decision together sometimes that makes them all better off in the long run, even though individually these decisions suck, right? Like we don't want to wear masks, we don't want to have to do all these things, but we do it to make the world slightly better, right? So the quantity of social capital depends on how much people of the same community are affected by the public good and how much they can trust each other. So let's say that someone really wants to wear a mask, but they trust that no one else is going to wear a mask. They do not trust anybody else. Then why do they do it if they think that no one else will? There has to be some sort of trust component that's built in by saying like, oh, other people behave in this way, or oh, other people are contributing, or oh, there's a communal aspect to this. Why are there all the signs around campus talking about like, yeah, do your part, stay 6 feet apart? It's because it creates a communal atmosphere, and then people are more likely to be altruistic in those points. Because there's some sort of guaranteed reciprocity, or at least the idea of guaranteed reciprocity. If you do this good action, it's much more likely that other people will do that good action, and then everybody can be better off, right? So what about public provision? We see that private provision may not necessarily do the best possible thing we need for society, right? Like if I told everyone that they had to pay for the street outside of their house to be clean and fixed without potholes, they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it because they're not the only one who like drives on that part of the street, and someone won't. They'll be under provision. There will be some crappy parts of the street. Let's talk about public provision though. Even with the private provision, we saw there's kind of a role for government in the provision of public goods. No individual is going to buy missiles, so sometimes we need, through election, of thinking that this might actually be best for society. Let's assume that that happens and we all elect that the system is actually for the best for us. Then we need a centralized hub, which we sometimes call a government, to provide the public goods. None of us want to buy missiles, but we all will be willing to pay like $1 or $2 of missiles, and everybody paying $1 or $2 of missiles goes to the government, and then they have missiles. Lighthouses. Maybe everybody who lives on the coast or has a boat really would like a lighthouse, but none of them can afford a lighthouse. So maybe they all put in like $1 or $2, or maybe like a fee for the dock that's about $15. That makes it so that the people who own boats are more likely to pay for the lighthouse. And this money goes in a pool, and it goes to a centralized location of the government that we all have elected and agreed that they are helping us out with this problem that none of us wants to pay for individually. And then they provide a lighthouse. So there's technically a role of government in the provision of public goods, because sometimes it's the way to be able to overcome the fact that there's this excludability issue as well as this rivalness issue, right? So under private provision, not everyone contributes to the public good. It's just true. If I told everyone that we had to pay for a lighthouse, we're like 14 hours away from the coast, so people aren't going to do that, right? That's not happening. We may not want to pay for a lighthouse that the people in North Carolina are going to use for. But government provision potentially solves some of this problem of non-contributors, because it says, okay, well, here's a bundle of goods instead of each individual good, and you're going to like pay some taxes for this bundle of goods, which can include these 4 things that affect you and a lighthouse and some missiles, right? But there's several challenges in that government provision. That sounds like a beautiful system where we just go to everybody and we say, hey, we need you to pay X, but X is way lower than you having to pay for things yourself, and you get all these benefits. Well, we all know that's not necessarily what happens, right? The money might go to government, but it might be spent inefficiently, or maybe it's more than what we really would have been willing to pay for those goods, or maybe you might end up paying for things that you don't necessarily care about. Like back in the 1930s, they collected taxes to develop what was it? It was like a group of people who their job was to figure out like 300 additional uses for peas, because we had an overproduction of peas that year. No one cares about the overproduction of peas in 1930s, right? Like that was kind of an additional cost that was happening that might have been challenging or inefficient for some people. So why do some people contribute and some people don't? Because we have our contributions and our non-contributors. Well, government provision is financed by private individuals. You would like to think the government could just print money, but they cannot just print money, because if they just print money, then prices will go up to adjust for all the extra money that's now in the economy. It's called inflation, right? So they can't just print money. What they need is to kind of finance particular things that we have agreed as good for society by taking some payments from private individuals. Some of this might be by investment, some of it might be by donation, but the most common one is by taxes, taxing on businesses and taxing on individuals. But maybe there's some people who don't necessarily want to contribute. There's some people that don't want to pay their taxes. Okay, cool. You should, the IRS says you should, but there's some people that don't want to pay their taxes, right? But in some systems, by forcing non-contributors to contribute to the fund for public provision, the government can increase the total goods provided. If the government, ideally, could go around to every single person who did not pay their taxes and said, nope, not happening, pay me your taxes. Well, then there's a lot more goods for everyone, right? Because the non-contributors have now contributed. There's more total public goods, but there's also a cost to going around and finding all the non-contributors and getting them to contribute. Non-contributors will be forced to increase their expenditures on a good that they may not necessarily want, like maybe they really do not want missiles, and if you go to them and you force them to pay taxes, and they have to pay for the missiles that they really don't want, right? So they're increasing their expenditure on goods that they don't necessarily care about. While contributors, if we go around and we get all the non-contributors to start paying their taxes, contributors will experience an increase effective in wealth, right? Because they now get more of a good without increasing the amount that they're paying for the good at all, because other people are now paying for the good. So this has a positive income effect on the purchase of private goods. So government intervention sometimes crowds out spending. What do I mean by crowding out spending? I mean, if a government starts providing lighthouses, then individuals don't really pay for lighthouses, right? Like some of them might still pay for lighthouses, but definitely not to the point they did before government started contributing it. Ow! Did you just bite me? Sorry. The cat has overtaken the keyboard. We will try to continue on with this lesson, but I fear for my safety. Hi. Are you leaving? Okay, goodbye. I no longer fear for my safety. So it's really interesting. The crowd out idea is that sometimes when government starts providing something, you provide less of it, right? For example, what's a good one? learning pods. So way back in ye olden days, before public education really became a thing, a lot of people did have tutors inside their homes. They would hire a tutor, and that tutor might not only teach their children, but the children of the surrounding households. It sounds a lot like the learning pods we have today, right? But then government started coming in, and they started raising money, and they started actually providing education. So they said schoolhouses and teachers that were paid by the government, and people were more likely to go to public school. And then the number of learning pods that people had in their house plummeted. Like, they still existed. There were still some households that preferred to homeschool or to prefer to hire private teachers in their house, but not nearly to the extent there was before public education became a thing and before there were schoolhouses and a place that you could send your child to for a free education. Free, you still pay taxes for it, but for an education, right? So this is a really interesting thing that we see, is that sometimes when the government starts providing something, it'll crowd out some private investment. A lot of people will stop paying for it, but some still will. It doesn't fully crowd out. So that means that there has to be a mix of public and private goods, right? There's got to be a mix of people that just want to produce things on their own and kind of government intervention to help with the production of things that might be underprovided because they're really expensive for individuals to provide. So we have two extreme examples. We have the idea that everything is provided entirely by the public sector. So that means the government is in charge of producing your phones and your clothes and your haircuts and everything else like that. Well, we've seen in practice that that may not necessarily work as well, because in the countries that have come closest to it, which are generally Cuba and North Korea, you have like a limited number of haircuts that people can choose from. There's limited amounts of public sector. The trade, there's lots of trade issues. It's a little difficult, right? That doesn't mean it's impossible. On paper, it looks like a pretty cool idea, but it may not be applicable to have an extreme where everything is provided by the government, because if you provide everything by the government, how do they know what prices they should have? If everything is just given to you, how can they figure out what the demand actually is for a good relative to supplying it, so you don't have an underproduction or an overproduction, which causes you to have less variety in the markets? So we have that extreme. The other extreme is privately producing everything. So I have to pay for all the lighthouses and all the defense, and I have to pay for all the clean air myself, and there's no one else who will help. I have to rely on everyone else to fix the 6 feet of road in front of their house, and everybody has to do it themselves, and I just trust that the road will be good. Well, that's kind of another extreme, right? May work, may not work, looks good on paper, but people don't tend to actually cooperate that well. So in between the two, there's some sort of balance. What that balance is depends. It really depends. And what our job is just to analyze the policies and situations that we see, not necessarily to choose the right policies and situations. We need to understand it with an economic language so that we can analyze it and we can provide information. But one example of like the government subsidizing or mandating private provisions, they say like, hey, private companies have to provide this, or I'm subsidizing them to provide this. There can be issues with that. That's called contracting out government work, right? So the government generally produces prisons, but in the last couple decades, prisons got expensive and there's private companies that can do prisons. So they said, okay, we're going to subsidize private prisons by instead giving all these tax cuts and all this financial incentive to private prisons. And then what we saw when that happened was essentially what happens in Orange is the New Black. You have 3 times as many prison people in a very small population. It gets rid of all the benefit programs that they did have. People die. COVID-19 runs rampant through the prison system, and we're seeing that in at least 22 different states right now. So sometimes there's an issue with something like that, or like halfway houses. You know, the houses that provide some people that might have had some sort of drug or criminal record a safe space to be able to start to build up their life again before they go fully back into society. when they started being contracted out, so they started going around to different private entities and they said, hey, we'll give you a lot of tax breaks and some money to be able to provide this halfway home. Well, then the quality of halfway homes for people that are trying to re-engage with society ended up plummeting down, and then they weren't able to get the help that they needed, and there was a high rate of recidivism where people would just end up having to steal and commit crimes again because there was no safe space for them to learn and try to build their life without committing crimes. So there can sometimes be problems with mandating private provision. There's a lot of problems with government providing incentives for private provision, but then there's also a lot of problems with the public sector or government providing everything. And the basic line is sometimes it's a mess. A lot of the time it's a mess. And that's why we teach public economics. And that's why we learn public economics, because we want to try to figure out how to minimize the mess, or how to do our best in helping people. And the way that we do this is by measuring the cost and benefits of different sort of public provisions. So optimal public good provisions require being able to measure both the benefits and the cost. All right, we got a lighthouse. What is the benefit of this lighthouse? We have 4 less shipwrecks. What is the cost of this lighthouse? $1.8 million. We can measure that, and we can look into this, and we can see, okay, what are the benefits relative to the cost? Will people be willing to pay the cost privately? Or do they get more benefit from society for something that's really costly but they can't afford on their own? Then how are we going to be able to make this so that we can benefit them without having these shipwrecks, right? So optimal public good provision requires being able to measure these benefits and goods. And guess what? It's difficult. That example that I just used, way easier numbers than normal, because we don't necessarily know what all the benefits and costs are. Let's say that we build a highway. We build a highway through the middle of town. Okay, we can kind of get a good idea of what the cost is. We'll know how much the labor inputs are and how much the goods produced are, and then maybe we might have an idea of maintenance. And let's say it's the perfect world where we understand these individual costs. But we still don't know what that is relative to the benefits. We don't know how many million people will be on that highway. Where are they going? How much money are they making at their jobs that they can get to on the highway relative to not being able to go on the highway? Well, how many people use the highway to commit crimes? Well, that's less benefit that we're getting because there's more people committing crimes. Figuring out that benefits part is really, really, really difficult because we have direct benefits, we have indirect benefits, we have a lot of unintended consequences and benefits that happen from projects. So we have to figure out what these costs and benefits are by using all of our skills and tools and looking at them together to figure out, okay, well, is this necessarily something that should be provided or not? So the benefits of highway construction are very difficult to measure. I had given us our perfect example if we knew exactly the supplies, the laborers, and the maintenance, but that doesn't really happen. And we don't know what's the value of saving time from traffic jams. We don't know what the cost on streets of even having traffic jams are on having the weight and pressure on there. We don't know what the value to society is of having reduced number of deaths. I can put a number to it. Like, let's say that there's 3,100 people whose lives would be saved by an improved highway system. I can say that the average economic impact of a person in their lifetime is like 285,000. I can look at the net present value of that for those people, but that doesn't account for the individuals. There might have been the best heart surgeon in the world who's going to cure cancer, or there might be a small child who's really going to grow up to be the person who creates world peace. We don't know those things. We don't know what the actual cost and the reduction of deaths are. So these difficult questions are addressed by the field of cost-benefit analysis. That's what we're getting into next week, actually, is we're going to start thinking about cost and benefit and figuring out how to be able to compare these when we're looking at projects and project frameworks, right? So just at the end of the day, why does this all matter? Why did I just spend 30 minutes of your day telling you about these public goods? And that's because for this class, I really need you to understand that there's different types of goods. There can be ones that are rivalrous, the ones that you're competing for, or there can be ones that are excludable where you can stop people from using them, or ones that are non-excludable where you can't stop people from using them. And then we got ones that make it very difficult to figure out how to pay for. A lighthouse helps lots of people, but they're also very expensive to set up. No one wants to really pay for the lighthouse. Street lamps make roads way safer, but no one really wants to pay for the street lamps because they're expensive. But lots and lots of people live if we have them. So what do we do? And because we have these public goods that are non-rival and non-excludable, we end up having free rider problems. People that may not pay into the system at all, but still get the benefits. There are lots of people who don't pay taxes, but still get national defense streetlights and lighthouses. So if your chance of getting caught is low, why would you pay taxes if you can still get all the benefits for free? So this means that some people might want to privately provide, but if they privately provide, it has to kind of be fueled by altruism, because there has to be some sort of benefit for this large cost. This large cost, you have to have more than just your benefit, right? You have to get a benefit from other people benefiting for there to be private provision. And sometimes even then, private provision is not enough. So we have to start thinking about public provision and how we can get to the optimal amount of a good. And sometimes this leaves opportunity for government. Now, is government always the most efficient solution? No, totally not. But we need to figure out times when it is efficient, or at least more efficient than the alternative, and when it's less efficient, so that instead we could try to incentivize private provision. So we have these two different ways of looking at things, and we're going to use the tools in this class to try to build a system, or to try to understand when maybe it might be best to have intervention and when maybe it might be best to not have intervention. And that's just neat. I think that that's pretty cool, because it's just an interesting way that we're able to look and analyze the world. And with that, that's going to be the end. I will see you in class. We have some fun activities this week. I will talk to you later. Have a great one.